All right, I know I talk a lot about swim baits and spinner baits and stuff like that, but I got a few little tricks up my sleeve when it comes to jerk baits. They can be deadly in the right situation. Trouble is, sometimes it's hard to tell when that situation is. But somebody told me once, and I found it to be kind of true, is that a good time to throw a jerk bait is when you think a spinner bait should work, but it doesn't. And there was a lake that I fish a lot, and I had been going up there, and it was in the fall of the year. It was, coming up winter time. It was late November, getting into December, and I knew this lake very well. I threw my crankbaits, I threw my spinner baits, couldn't catch anything. Just nothing like I should have. And I happened to think, I said, well, let's try it. I whipped out a jerk bait and I stomped on them. I had 4 fish over 5 pounds that day. A couple of them weighed over 6. And I could be fairly aggressive with the jerk bait. I could throw it, and just let it sit for a few seconds, snatch it, and work it pretty quick. And one time I was just letting it sit there, and I mean, one knocked the slack out of my line. And it was this little jerk bait right here. It's called a Berkeley Frenzy. I am not one of these guys that thinks that a lure's got to cost $15 or $20, $30 to be effective. These little things are pretty cheap, $6, $7. I've had this a long time. I caught a 8.3 largemouth on this thing one time. It's a floater, and that's the thing about jerk baits, things you got to look at. You got to look at the size, which is crucial. Then you got to figure out, do they float, do they suspend, or do they sink? Because you got all 3 kinds, and they all 3 have different uses. This is a floater. This is a Rapala X-Rap. It's a suspender. It is deadly too. I have stomped them on it before. Not expensive. That's what it looks like out of the box. One thing about these X-Wraps is they throw like a missile. I mean, somebody warned me when first time I was going to use one. They said, you better be careful because you'll chunk that sucker up in the woods if you're not careful. And I just about did. I mean, I don't think it's got one of those internal transfer weights in it, but it casts like a bullet and it will flat catch them. Again, not real expensive. Then you've got your slow sinkers. Rapala Husky Jerk. I love them. Caught a lot of fish on these things. And it sinks real slow. And a little trick I found out, if you want to adjust the fall rate of a jerk bait, and this is the thing to think about jerk baits too. As the water gets colder and denser, the sink rate will change a little bit. They're going to sink a little slower in colder water than they will in warmer water because the colder water is denser. So that's something to kind of put in the back of your head. But I put a split ring on them just to give them a little more action. But if you've got one that's not sinking fast enough, there's 2 things you can do. 3 things you can do, really. You can use the suspend strips or the suspend dots. I don't like them. You can use a little bit bigger treble hook if you want to. I've done that on some lures. Just put a little bigger hook on it. You can also use this stuff, lead wire, and you can wrap it around the hook shank and your bait will sink a little faster. So that's something to think about. Then you've got, like I say, different sizes, different finishes. You've got deep divers like that, and then you got the ones that don't go so deep. And this kind of thing goes back for a long time. I mean, this thing here's old Rebel Spoonbill. That thing's 40, 50 years old. But it's still a jerk bait. It's a diving minnow. You can do whatever you want to do with it. And then you got, I guess at some point they stop calling them jerk baits and start calling them swim baits. But then you got this. This is another Rapala. I've got one even bigger than this somewhere. It's a bomber. It's like 6 inches long. It's huge, big old thing. They used to, it got famous kind of up on Lanier 20, 30, 40 years ago, fishing at night for stripers. And then I was on a podcast last year sometime, and I was showing some of the older baits. That's what the whole podcast was dedicated to, is the older baits. And I had it with me then. I thought I had it with me now, but I can't find a cotton picking thing. But a young guy was in one of those tournaments on Lanier, and he was using it. And he caught, somebody said he caught like a 6-pound spot or something like that on it. It's a big old long A bomber. Then you've got the old redfin, which is about the same thing. And I, for the life of me, don't know where I put them, but don't guess it matters. This is another big old jerkbait. It's called a Flat Max Rapala. Again, I had noticed I kind of like Rapalas. And it is Rapala. It's not Rapala, it's Rapala. Rapala is the way the man pronounces his name. So I think he would know. I mean, he's long gone, but the company lives on. But yeah, I think the guy's name was Laurie Rapala, was the kind who got the whole thing going. But anyway, like I say, you got these little, jerk baits that deep dive, got the big lip on them. And then, let's see, I found another one. Here we go. This is another one that I found that I kind of sweet on. It's a Berkeley Juke. Pretty good size jerkbait. But, you know, you kind of, getting into working the jerkbaits, you kind of got to adjust your cadence a lot of times to the water temperature. There was one day, I mean, I had to let the thing sit 15, 20, 25 seconds. It was slow that day, but caught some good fish on it. But some days you can be more aggressive, you know, obviously as the water warms up. But you just kind of, you got to figure out what kind of bait you want. Do you want one shallow? Do you want one deep? Do you want a suspender? Do you want a floater diver? Then you got to figure out the cadence. Sometimes you can get real aggressive, it's like jerk, jerk, pause, jerk, jerk, pause. Other times you gotta let it sit. And that one day, that was the only way we could catch them. You had to let that thing soak for 15, 20, 25, 30 seconds even sometimes. And that is hard for me to do. But sometimes you got to do what you got to do. So anyway, that's kind of my spiel on jerkbaits. I don't use them a lot just because they're slow. But some days, I mean, it'll save you fanny. But like I say, you've got sinkers, you got floaters, and you got suspenders. This is a real good picture of one that I wrapped with the this lead wire. You can get it at Tackle Warehouse. It's like 035. It's very real, you know, you wrap it around. And when you wrap it around, I would suggest putting some super glue on it, Gorilla Glue or something, to make sure it stays in place. But it'll make that sinking bait dive sink a little bit faster if you want it to. But I think that's pretty much it. So like I say, don't count out a jerkbait, especially this time of year. It'll put them in the boat sometimes. And like I say, you ain't got to pay arm and a leg for them. These husky jerks, they don't cost a lot. I've got all kinds, but I'm a big fan of Rapala. So anyway, that's a little something to stick in your back pocket for a rainy day. And I'm going to put a picture. I got a picture of that 8.3 that I caught on this little old Berkeley Frenzy. And it was funny that day because a guy I knew, he'd come up and was fishing on the same lake, and it was real sunny, and the water was just slick. And he had gotten there that day before I had, and he had been throwing a jerkbait, and he couldn't catch anything on it. Finally the wind got up, and I said, okay, wind's blowing, I'm going to try it. And boom, I caught that 8.3, and that's something else I totally almost forgot about. The best jerkbait conditions, or you got some chop on the water, or you got a cloudy day, or you got both. I have caught them on a slick, calm, sunny day, but that's getting into some of that stuff where I said you got to let the thing soak for 20 minutes, seems like. Yeah, a little chop on the water, overcast, that's good jerkbait water. But it's also good for a lot of things: swim baits, glide baits, spinner baits, you know. But that goes back to what I said earlier about sometimes the best time to throw a jerkbait is when a spinner bait should work, but it ain't. But it just, you know, it's just an old saying somebody told me, and one day it saved me. So anyway, I'm gonna go in and edit this thing and throw a picture of that 8.3 in there, and that should do it. So until next time.